The dawn in Chicago seemed endless. On the 23rd floor of a skyscraper on Michigan Avenue, the silence was broken only by the rhythmic sound of a squeegee gliding across the marble floor. Daniel Alvarez knew every corner of this place. Every movement was slow, precise, the result of years repeating the same cleaning routine in silence. He paused for a moment, wiped the sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand, and looked up at the panoramic window. The city sparkled with millions of lights, but to Daniel, that scene felt distant, as if he were observing a world he no longer belonged to. Few knew that years ago he had been a professor of civil engineering at the University of Texas at Austin. He was the one who reported flaws in a bridge in Houston. No one listened, and only a few months later, the bridge collapsed, killing dozens of people. Daniel's career ended that very day. His honor vanished. Colleagues turned their backs. The press vilified him. He became the scapegoat for the tragedy. From then on, Daniel hid behind the green uniform of a janitor. But tonight, the echo of high heels down the empty hallway made his heart freeze. At this hour, there should have only been him and the security guard. A female voice rang out, clear and confident. "Excuse me." Daniel raised his head. In front of him stood Rebecca Collins, CEO of Collins EdTech. Her blonde hair was tied in a neat bun. Her navy dress radiated authority, and her green eyes pierced right through him, cold, yet shadowed with fatigue. "Are you the night janitor?" she asked. Daniel gave a slight nod. "Yes." Daniel Alvarez Rebecca studied him for a moment, then suddenly smiled boldly. "Good. Then listen carefully. I need a date for the party. Come with me?" In that instant, Daniel froze. He didn't know it yet, but that seemingly reckless invitation was about to open the door to an entirely different life. Years ago, before Chicago became his place of exile, Daniel Alvarez once stood at the lectern of the University of Texas at Austin, greeted by thunderous applause from his students. He was one of the youngest professors in the civil engineering department, renowned not only for his deep knowledge, but for the way he inspired. Every lecture Daniel gave was tied to real life. Bridges, buildings, roads, where knowledge became the backbone of society. One summer morning, Daniel led a group of interns to the construction site of a massive bridge on the outskirts of Houston. The project was praised as the city's new symbol, the pride of Texas. He examined every steel beam, every weld. The trained eye of an experienced engineer saw what others overlooked: a few girders strained under the wrong load, the foundation settling more than expected, and hairline cracks across the reinforced concrete. "Do you see it?" Daniel asked his students. They shook their heads, dazzled only by the scale of the structure. He sighed. "The most dangerous flaws are the ones we can't see right away." That very afternoon, he filed a report, attaching photographic evidence, and sent it to the project managers and Houston's Department of Transportation. But the reply he received was cold dismissal. "Professor Alvarez, you're exaggerating. The project has passed inspection. There's nothing to worry about. Please focus on your teaching." Daniel refused to give up. He raised concerns in meetings, warned students, even wrote to the press. But instead of being heard, he was branded a troublemaker, someone desperate for attention. And then came the fateful day. One winter afternoon, less than 3 months after the bridge's inauguration, traffic was packed across its span. In a split second, the sound of metal cracking split the air. The entire central section collapsed. Screams tore through the chaos. Cars plunged into the raging river below. Smoke, dust, and blaring horns filled the scene. Dozens of lives were extinguished in a matter of minutes. Daniel stood frozen before the television in his university office. He had warned them. He had seen it coming. But no one had listened. Within hours, the media swarmed with images, reporters demanding answers. Professor Alvarez had raised concerns. Why didn't he stop the tragedy? Instead of recognition, his name was dragged through the mud. Officials blamed him. If there was really a danger, why didn't you stop the project from the start? Contractors lashed out. He just wanted to destroy the reputation of our work. Every accusation cut like a knife. Students whispered, colleagues drifted away. Daniel went from being a hero to the scapegoat. A month later, he was forced to resign. Every door in his career slammed shut. Friends who once called him a colleague avoided his eyes. And in the house once filled with laughter, there was only silence. His wife, worn down by public pressure and uncertainty, quietly left, taking their young son with her. Night after night, Daniel woke from nightmares, haunted by the collapse. Cars falling into the river, screams of families losing loved ones. Unable to bear it any longer, he left Texas for Chicago, a place where no one knew his name. There, he took a night shift janitor job in a skyscraper on Michigan Avenue. The work demanded no reputation, only bowed heads, gloves, sweeping, and silence. Day after day, he turned himself into the invisible man, a shadow in the glowing corridors. He avoided every gaze, never started a conversation, always gone before sunrise. Sometimes, standing by the glass, looking down at Chicago's lights, his chest felt heavy. He wondered, did my life end the day that bridge collapsed? He believed second chances did not exist for those the world had already condemned. He had no idea that this quiet existence was only the calm before the storm. Because soon, someone would walk into his life, pull him out of the shadows of guilt, and force him to face the world again. And that person was Rebecca Collins. The night in Chicago was unusually quiet. Inside the glass tower on Michigan Avenue, the only sounds were the low hum of a vacuum cleaner and the faint scent of cleaning chemicals drifting through the halls. Daniel Alvarez began his usual night shift. He moved like a shadow, careful, silent, avoiding the gaze of the few employees still lingering late. He knew every corner, every lit corridor. The job required no thought, just repetition. And that was exactly what he wanted. No one cared, no one asked questions, no one spoke the name Professor Alvarez. He believed that if he stayed invisible long enough, the pain of the past would fade. But tonight was different. The sharp echo of high heels cut through the empty hallway. Daniel froze. At this hour, there should only have been him and a guard downstairs. He looked up. A woman's silhouette emerged. Straight shoulders, blonde hair tied in a neat bun, a navy dress tailored with precision. The light above spilled over her features, highlighting a face both striking and shadowed with fatigue. It was Rebecca Collins, the young CEO of Collins EdTech. Chicago's press hailed her as the shooting star of educational technology, innovative, ambitious, powerful. "Excuse me." Her voice was clear, confident. Daniel, caught off guard, set his mop aside. "Yes, ma'am?" Rebecca studied him from head to toe, then asked directly, "Are you the night janitor?" Daniel nodded. "Yes, Daniel Alvarez." Her green eyes flickered with something at the unfamiliar name, but she didn't press further. She turned toward the glass wall, gazing at the city below. "When I can't sleep, I come here," she said, her voice softer. "Work is easier than sitting alone in an empty penthouse." Daniel nodded lightly, hesitant to respond. Yet somehow, words slipped out of his mouth before he could stop them. "Big problems at work?" Rebecca turned back, surprised a janitor would dare ask such a thing. But instead of anger, a faint smile curved her lips. Let's just say, I'm facing a challenge that could decide my company's future. Daniel remained silent. His instincts urged him to ask more, but fear of being dismissed held him back. Then Rebecca continued, her tone measured, as if unloading a burden. Tomorrow night, I have a dinner with a foreign investor. His decision could bring in $50 million. It could change everything for us. Daniel nodded. That sounds excellent. Rebecca shrugged, her green eyes glinting with frustration. It would be, if he didn't insist I bring someone along. He's old-fashioned, conservative. He believes personal stability means business reliability. Daniel frowned slightly. He understood exactly what she meant. Rebecca turned, locking eyes with him. I don't have anyone who fits. I can't just take anyone. It has to be someone who can hold a conversation, carry themselves well, inspire confidence. Daniel felt a strange intuition. He didn't want to believe what he was thinking until she said it. Her eyes narrowed, her voice sharp and daring. Do you own a suit, Daniel? He blinked, stunned. I do. But why? Rebecca stepped closer, her green eyes cutting straight through his defenses. Because I want you to be my date. The hallway fell silent. Daniel thought he must have misheard. Miss Collins? That's insane, he stammered, taking a step back. Maybe. Rebecca shrugged, lips curling into a defiant smile. But something tells me you're not just a janitor. Daniel swallowed hard, gripping the mop handle tightly. Memories surged. Lectures in Austin, the collapsed bridge, the accusing stares of the world. He had spent years hiding to avoid stepping into the fire again. I don't like deceiving people, he finally said. We won't lie about anything essential, Rebecca countered immediately, as if prepared for this. I just won't go into details about your job. One night, Daniel. It could save my company. Daniel turned to the window, gazing at the glittering city beyond the glass. Part of him longed to retreat into the safety of invisibility. But another part whispered, maybe this was the one chance to step out of the shadows. He drew in a deep breath, then asked quietly, and what would our story be? Rebecca's lips curved in a subtle, knowing smile. We met at an event. You're a civil engineering consultant. Daniel arched a brow. Consultant? That's not exactly a lie, is it? Exactly, she replied, her eyes never leaving his. For a moment, silence stretched between them. Neon light spilled down, reflecting the contrast. A janitor in a green uniform facing a CEO in an evening dress. Two worlds colliding, standing on the brink of a pact that could change everything. Rebecca extended her hand. So, are we agreed? Daniel stared at it for a long time. One handshake, one decision, one unpredictable future. Finally, he placed his calloused hand in hers. Their eyes met. Silence lingered, heavy with consequence. Then Rebecca leaned in, her whisper sealing the deal. Good. Tomorrow night, you're mine. The following afternoon, Daniel stood before the mirror in his small rented apartment on the outskirts of Chicago. He wore a charcoal gray suit Rebecca had prepared for him. The collar sat neatly, the tie perfectly adjusted. In that moment, he almost didn't recognize himself. The man reflected in the glass was no longer the anonymous janitor of the skyscraper, but another Daniel Alvarez, calm, composed, and dignified. He whispered softly, It's been so long since I've seen this face. His phone buzzed, a message from Rebecca. Cars waiting downstairs. Daniel drew in a deep breath, slipped on the jacket, and left the apartment. A sleek car waited outside. As Daniel stepped in, he nearly forgot to breathe. Rebecca Collins sat there, wrapped in an exquisitely tailored black dress that hugged every curve, accented with small pearl earrings. Her hair flowed loose instead of in its usual bun. Gone was the image of the stern CEO splashed across Chicago's business pages. Before him was a woman radiating elegance and allure, impossible to look away from. Daniel offered a faint smile. "You look different tonight." Rebecca tilted her head, lips curling slightly. "And you don't look like a janitor anymore?" They both laughed, though tension lingered beneath the surface. The car pulled away, carrying them toward the Four Seasons Hotel Chicago, where the night ahead would define everything. The restaurant glowed under warm golden lights, tables dressed in pristine linens, the soft hum of a piano floating in the air. The refined atmosphere made Daniel momentarily uneasy, but he recalled Rebecca's words. "Just be yourself." Across the room sat Robert Mendoza, the Argentine investor. He wore a pinstripe suit, silver-gray hair neatly combed, his eyes sharp with the weight of decades in business. Rebecca stepped forward with a confident smile. "Mr. Mendoza, thank you for seeing us." Mendoza rose, shook her hand, then turned his gaze to Daniel. "And this is—" Rebecca opened her mouth, but Daniel spoke first, his voice steady. "Daniel Alvarez, consultant in civil engineering." Mendoza's eyes flickered with interest. He nodded, gesturing for them to sit. Dinner began under an air of quiet scrutiny. Mendoza asked about Collins EdTech's strategy, about its 5-year vision. Rebecca answered firmly, though Daniel noticed the way her fingers tightened around her wine glass. Then came the shift. "Mr. Alvarez, what's your opinion on the integration of infrastructure and education technology?" Daniel blinked, caught off guard, but instinct, long dormant, rose again. The professor within him awoke. He spoke of the link between sustainable infrastructure and modern learning, illustrating with real projects he'd once overseen. When the subject veered near the Houston Bridge collapse, he didn't speak it aloud, but his examples of structural ethics and rigorous inspection carried the weight of lived tragedy. His words rang with depth, conviction, and humility. Mendoza listened intently, nodding. His sharp eyes softened, a rare flicker of admiration. "Rare to see someone so modest and prepared," he remarked slowly. Rebecca stole a glance at Daniel. In her green eyes shimmered more than relief at the meeting's success. There was recognition. Trust. As conversation flowed, Daniel no longer felt he was pretending. He spoke his truth, weaving knowledge that supported Rebecca's vision. Together, they moved in sync, his insights grounding her strategy, her passion amplifying his authority. When Mendoza asked how they had met, Daniel looked at Rebecca, then answered smoothly, "At an event." Mutual admiration, an instant connection, recognition at first sight. A faint blush colored Rebecca's cheeks, but she didn't deny it. The air lightened. Mendoza allowed himself a rare smile, lifting his glass. "Your business plans are solid. I think we can work together." Rebecca nearly dropped her spoon, disguising her relief. She leaned toward Daniel, whispering, "He's going to invest, because of you." Daniel only smiled, though deep inside, he knew this night had shifted something no contract could define. When they stepped out of the restaurant, the cold Chicago wind swept across the bright sidewalks. Rebecca pulled her coat tighter, then turned to him. "Do you realize what you just did?" she asked, her voice trembling between awe and gratitude. Daniel shrugged, a faint, wistful smile touching his lips. "I just told the truth." They paused before the waiting car. Streetlights glimmered in their eyes. No words were needed. Both of them felt it. Something had sparked tonight. something beyond an agreement. And they both knew there was no going back. 2 days after the dazzling evening at the Four Seasons, the offices of Collins EdTech were still lit late into the night. Rebecca stood alone in the conference room, staring at the freshly drafted contract from Mendoza. His signature was almost synonymous with a turning point. The company would finally have the capital to expand nationwide. The door burst open. Marcia Green, co-founder of the company, strode in. Unlike Rebecca, youthful, driven, full of energy, Marcia carried the sharp, cold aura of someone seasoned and calculating. Her smoke-gray suit clung perfectly, her narrowed eyes cutting like blades. "Impressive, Rebecca," Marcia said, setting her handbag down. "Our Argentine billionaire friend really did nod his head, didn't he?" Rebecca gave a restrained nod, trying to keep her voice calm. "Yes, this is a huge step for us." Marcia gave a dry laugh, stepped closer, and dropped a stack of photographs onto the table. Rebecca frowned, her heart sinking as her eyes fell on them. The pictures showed Daniel Alvarez, not in the suit from that glittering night, but in his green janitor uniform, bent over scrubbing floors. Others showed him pushing a trash cart, sweat dripping down his brow. Rebecca froze. "Where did you get these?" Marcia crossed her arms, her gaze triumphant. "Doesn't matter. What matters is, how will Mendoza react when he finds out your so-called consultant is just the janitor from your building?" The room grew heavy with silence. Rebecca's composure faltered. Her usual strength wavered. Marcia stepped closer, her voice low but razor-sharp. "Here's the deal. Either you step down and hand me majority control, or I tell him everything. Imagine the headline, 'Collins EdTech deceives foreign investor.' Do you think he'll still sign that check?" Rebecca clenched her fists, nails digging into her palms. Everything she had built now dangled over the edge of ruin. "You can't do this, Marcia. We built this company together." Marcia shrugged. "And now I'll be the one to save it. It's either me or public humiliation for both of you." With that, she turned and walked away, leaving the photos on the table like daggers driven into Rebecca's chest. That evening, Daniel found Rebecca sitting silently in her office, her eyes red. He stepped in, quietly shutting the door. "What happened?" She didn't speak, just pushed the photos toward him. Daniel glanced at them once, then calmly set them back down. "She knows," Rebecca whispered. "She'll ruin everything. Daniel, if Mendoza finds out—" He cut her off, voice firm. "Then we tell him first." Rebecca looked up, her eyes trembling. "Are you crazy? If he hears her version, he'll assume the worst." Daniel straightened, his gaze dark but steady. "Maybe. But if he hears ours, he might understand. Hiding will only prove her right. We tell the truth first." In that moment, Rebecca realized something. The man standing before her was no longer the invisible janitor of the hallways. He was a professor, an engineer, a man of integrity, the very quality she had long been missing. The next morning, they went together to the hotel where Mendoza was staying. Rebecca's steps were heavy with dread, but Daniel walked beside her, calm and resolute. Mendoza received them in a small conference room, leaning back in his chair, his sharp gaze measuring. "This is unexpected. What's so urgent?" Rebecca inhaled deeply, glanced at Daniel, then turned back. "Mr. Mendoza, before you sign anything, I need to be transparent with you." She told him everything, from inviting Daniel under the pressure of needing a companion to how they had never meant to deceive him about Daniel's true capabilities. Daniel, in a modest suit, sat upright, his eyes unwavering. Mendoza was silent for a long while, looking between them. The tension was suffocating. Finally, he asked, "So, you really met just a few days ago?" "Yes," Daniel answered firmly. "But regardless of the relationship, your decision should be based on what the company represents, not on appearances." Mendoza leaned back, thoughtful. "And why did you agree to this arrangement, Mr. Alvarez?" Daniel drew a deep breath. "Because I saw in Rebecca a leader who deserves a chance. And because, despite working as a janitor, I am still an engineer." The words rang out, stronger than any pitch deck could have been. Mendoza studied him for a long moment. Then, a rare smile touched his lips. "You two have courage. That's rare." Rebecca held her breath, her heart pounding as he continued. "The investment stands, but under one condition. I want Daniel as a technical advisor on the educational projects I'll fund." Rebecca gasped, hardly believing her ears. Are you serious?" Mendoza rose, extending his hand. "Completely." Rebecca leapt to her feet, clasping his hand, while Daniel simply bowed his head in gratitude. When the door closed behind them, Rebecca could no longer hold back. She turned and threw her arms around Daniel. "You saved everything? Again?" she whispered, her voice trembling with gratitude. "And something more." Daniel stood still, his hands slowly resting against her back. And in that embrace, they both knew. Something had begun between them, something neither could yet name. A week later, the grand boardroom of Collins EdTech was packed with board members. The air was as taut as a drawn wire. On the massive screen, one familiar image after another appeared. Daniel Alvarez in his green janitor's uniform, sweeping floors, pushing a trash cart, polishing glass walls. At the head of the table sat Marcia Green, legs crossed, eyes gleaming with triumph. She let each photo linger, stabbing at Rebecca and Daniel's credibility with every projection. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcia began, her voice cold yet theatrical, "this is the man our CEO introduced as a civil engineering consultant. Tell me, does this look like a consultant to you?" A murmur spread among the board, uncertainty in their eyes. Rebecca shot to her feet. "Marcia, this is unnecessary. You know Daniel's background, you know his expertise." Marcia sneered. "All I know is that investors were sold a story. And if that story unravels, our reputation collapses with it. Do you want Mendoza to see these pictures?" The room fell into deadly silence. Daniel drew a steady breath, rose, and walked toward the screen. He faced the board directly. "Yes, that's me," he said, his voice low, each word deliberate. "I clean floors. I take out trash. I polish glass walls. That's my current job." He paused, his gaze unflinching, his voice rising with conviction. "But my current job doesn't erase my qualifications. I am still the engineer who taught at the University of Texas. I am still the man who warned of structural flaws before a bridge collapsed. And I will always be the man who believes integrity matters more than appearances." The boardroom went still. No one dared breathe too loudly. Marcia smirked, but the sharpness in her smile faltered. "Fine words, Mr. Alvarez, but the fact remains. Your presence here leaves us vulnerable to legal consequences. Investors don't like secrets, and I assure you, once lawyers get involved—" She let the words hang like a blade suspended above them all. The following days were suffocating for Rebecca. Tension weighed heavily on her shoulders as warning calls poured in. Daniel remained outwardly calm, but deep down he knew Marcia could drag the matter into court at any moment. That was when a new figure appeared. Edward Foster, a Cuban-American entrepreneur and renowned education investor from Miami. Rebecca and Daniel met him in a small cafe, away from prying eyes. Edward was tall, solidly built, with salt and pepper hair, a disarming smile, and eyes sharp with calculation. "I've heard about your situation," he said, setting down his espresso. "Marcia is using her shares to manipulate. But I have a proposal." Daniel and Rebecca leaned in, listening closely. "I'm prepared to buy her shares, at a price high enough she won't refuse. With that, control of the company will be secured. You'll have me as a strategic partner instead of a saboteur inside your walls." Rebecca hesitated. "How much control are you asking for?" Edward smiled. "Enough to neutralize her. But I don't want control. I want partnership. Collins EdTech has potential. With my capital and your innovation, we can reach markets you've only dreamed of." The room fell quiet. Rebecca looked at Daniel. He gave a small nod, a silent signal. "Marcia won't let go easily," Daniel said evenly. "She thrives on control." Edward shrugged. "Then we make her an offer so irresistible she'll have no choice." A few days later, behind closed doors, Rebecca and Daniel faced Marcia. Edward sat at the head of the table, a file and an offer letter laid neatly before him. Marcia crossed her arms, her gaze icy. "Why am I here?" Edward leaned forward, calm and deliberate. "Because I want to buy your shares, at a premium." Marcia let out a cold laugh. "You think you can buy me out like some rookie?" Edward didn't flinch. "Not buy you out. Free you. You'll leave with more than you invested, with your reputation intact, and without the burden of being a minority shareholder fighting a lost war." The room froze. Marcia's eyes darted from Rebecca to Daniel, then back to Edward. She knew that refusing meant being trapped in a battle that would only erode her credibility. After a long silence, she finally smirked. "Fine. But don't think this is over." She signed the papers, pressing the pen down as if engraving her resentment into the page. When Marcia left, Rebecca exhaled as though a noose had been cut from around her neck. Daniel remained composed, though a spark of renewed faith flickered in his eyes. Edward rose and extended his hand. "From this day forward, we build something bigger, together." Rebecca clasped his hand, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you, Edward. You saved more than just a company today." Edward turned to Daniel. "And you, Mr. Alvarez. I've seen enough to know you're not meant for janitor's work anymore. From now on, you're officially the director of engineering." Autumn in Chicago carried a crisp, biting wind. In the Collins EdTech office, Rebecca Collins was in a meeting with the legal team when an urgent message came through from the company's lawyer. Marcia Green is negotiating to sell her shares to Marcus Valdez. The name froze Rebecca in place. Her mind instantly went to Daniel, the man who had buried himself for years because of one confrontation with Valdez. That evening, when Rebecca told Daniel, he went pale. The cigarette he had just lit slipped from his fingers and hit the floor. "Marcus Valdez? He still won't let me go," Daniel whispered, his voice trembling, as if the past itself was tightening around his throat. His mind spiraled back to Texas. In a closed-door meeting at the Department of Transportation, Daniel, then still a professor and scientific advisor, stood before a board, pointing at cracks and technical data on the charts. "If this bridge opens, it will collapse. I've run the numbers a dozen times." From the far end of the table, Marcus Valdez, the powerful construction magnate, let out a mocking laugh. "You're young, Alvarez. Don't think a few numbers on paper give you the right to judge my project. This bridge will go down in history. And your career," he leaned in, his voice like a curse, "will end faster than concrete can set." The eyes around the room shifted away. No one dared oppose Valdez. And months later, When the Houston Bridge collapsed, just as Daniel had predicted, he became the scapegoat, exactly as Valdez had promised. Now, in Chicago, Daniel slumped into a chair, clutching his head. If Valdez gets into this company, he'll destroy it from the inside. With just 15% of the shares, he'll have access to files, projects, even the ability to sway contracts. Rebecca stepped closer, resting a hand on his shoulder. We won't let him. He ruined you once. Not this time. Daniel's eyes flickered, torn between fear and resolve. He knew running was no longer an option. In the days that followed, Valdez's name began surfacing across financial news. He gave cryptic interviews about a major acquisition in Chicago. Rumors spread quickly, raising doubts about Collins EdTech's stability. Daniel lost countless nights of sleep. He paced the office hallways under neon light, his shadow stretching long against the walls. In his mind, Valdez's words echoed, "Careers end faster than bridges collapse." Rebecca saw his torment. One night, she spoke plainly. If you walk away now to avoid facing him, you'll regret it for the rest of your life. Daniel, you have to stand up this time. Together, they turned to Edward Foster and Mendoza. Both knew Valdez was under investigation for fraud and had a history of using falsified documents to travel abroad. To bring him down, reason isn't enough, Edward said. We need to make him expose himself. The plan was set. Marcia, desperate for cash, would act as bait. She agreed to stage a meeting with Valdez, promising to sell him internal documents in exchange for a hefty deposit. In the shadows, the FBI would be watching. A deserted cafe on the outskirts of Chicago. Rain drizzled against the windows. Marcia sat waiting, calm on the surface, though unease flickered in her eyes. The door swung open. Marcus Valdez entered with 2 bodyguards. Broad-shouldered, expensive suit, the same arrogant gleam in his eyes. He dropped a thick envelope of cash on the table. "Show me what you've got," he growled, a sinister smile tugging at his lips. Marcia swallowed hard and slid a folder of fake documents across the table. Valdez flipped it open, smirking. "Good. With this, I'll make Collins beg for mercy. And Alvarez," he lifted his head, his voice hissing, "he'll watch everything burn again." In a surveillance van nearby, Daniel watched the feed on a monitor. At the mention of his name, his fists clenched, sweat beading on his brow. The past stabbed into him like knives. Valdez pulled out a pen, signing the false receipt. At that instant, the cafe lights blazed. The door burst open. "FBI! Hands where we can see them!" Agents stormed the room. Valdez's bodyguards barely had time to react before they were slammed to the ground. Valdez roared, thrashing as agents forced him into cuffs. "You set me up! Alvarez, I'll bury you for this!" His face twisted in rage as he was dragged out. In the van, Daniel's heart pounded. As Valdez disappeared from view, he closed his eyes, a single hot tear sliding down his cheek. When it was all over, Daniel and Rebecca stood outside the police precinct. The Chicago night was quiet, the wind biting cold. Rebecca gripped his hand tightly. "It's over." Daniel lifted his gaze to the stars, scattered faintly across the sky. For the first time in years, he felt he could breathe fully. "No," he said slowly. "It's never truly over. But tonight, I closed the darkest chapter." Rebecca looked at him, her eyes brimming with pride. In that moment, she knew Daniel had finally stepped out from the shadows of his past, and from here, there was only forward. After the downfall of Marcus Valdez, Collins EdTech entered a new era. With the backing of Mendoza and Edward Foster, the company expanded across the United States. Schools from New York to Los Angeles began adopting the integrated educational platform that Rebecca and Daniel had worked tirelessly to build. The new headquarters was established in Miami, a city of sunshine and turquoise waves. It was not only a hub of international commerce, but also the beginning of a new chapter in Daniel's life. One morning, Daniel walked into a lecture hall at the University of Miami. Dozens of students waited, eyes shining with expectation. For the first time in nearly a decade, he heard the words again. Professor Alvarez. The sound made his heart tremble. He stood at the front of the class, staring at the blackboard, the chalk in hand, and suddenly remembered his days in Texas, when everything was still untainted by disaster. Daniel began his lecture on professional ethics in engineering. He didn't read from a textbook. Instead, he told his own story. The Houston Bridge, the silence of an entire system, the price paid in human lives. Ethics, he said, is never the easy choice. It may cost you everything, but without it, everything you build is meaningless. The hall was silent. When his lecture ended, the students rose in thunderous applause. To Daniel, those claps were proof that he had truly returned. One evening, Daniel and Rebecca strolled along Miami Beach. The ocean breeze carried the salt of the sea, city lights reflecting across the waves. Rebecca spoke of a new project in South America, her eyes alight like stars. Daniel listened, smiling softly. When they stopped by the sand, he turned to her, his gaze steady. Rebecca, all my life, I've only known how to run from fear. But since meeting you, I've learned how to face it. And now, I don't want to walk with you just in business. He knelt down, opening a small ring box, his voice trembling but resolute. I want to go as your husband. Rebecca froze, tears sparkling in the glow of the city lights. She laughed through her sobs. Daniel, I was going to ask you the same thing. They embraced, their kiss under the moonlight marking the beginning of a new chapter. The wedding was held on a Florida beach, beneath swaying palms. No extravagance, no spectacle, just family, close friends, and colleagues who had weathered storms with them. Rebecca wore a simple white dress, her hair flowing loose. Daniel stood in a navy suit, his eyes brighter than ever. When the pastor asked, "Do you, Daniel Alvarez, take Rebecca Collins?" his voice rang out firm and unwavering. I do. Applause thundered, blending with the sound of waves crashing ashore. A few months later, Rebecca entered the office with a strange glow on her face. Daniel was bent over blueprints when she gently placed his hand on her stomach. He froze. Are you? Rebecca nodded, tears in her eyes. 2 months. Daniel was stunned, then burst into laughter like a child. He lifted her, spinning her around the office. Outside the glass walls, employees cheered and clapped. It was an explosion of joy. The invisible janitor was now about to become a father. As time passed, Collins EdTech became more than a company. It became a symbol of inspiration. One image quickly went viral on social media. Rebecca Collins, the powerful CEO, delivering a keynote at an international education summit, with a newborn in her arms. Speaking on balancing leadership and motherhood, she embodied her own message. The photo was shared millions of times, hailed as a symbol of humanized leadership. At the same time, another photo caught fire. Daniel Alvarez, in a hard hat and rolled-up sleeves, guiding workers at a construction site for a new school. On his shoulders sat his little son, holding a blueprint as if mimicking his father. The press named it, From Janitor to Builder of Futures. That night, when their child was asleep, Rebecca and Daniel sat on the balcony of their oceanfront apartment. Waves lapped gently below, moonlight spilling across the water. Rebecca rested her head on his shoulder. "We've come so far, Daniel." He smiled, his gaze drifting to the crib inside where their baby slept. "And this is just the beginning." 5 years had passed since Daniel and Rebecca first laid the foundation in Miami. Today, Collins Alvarez Technologies had become a global educational powerhouse, operating in more than 12 countries, bringing safe and modern learning opportunities to millions of students. From a tiny office in Chicago, they had grown into a leading voice for education built on sustainable infrastructure. Earthquake-resistant schools in Chile, green classrooms in California, mobile learning hubs across Africa, all bore the fingerprints of Daniel and Rebecca. One morning, in their Ocean View apartment in Miami, Rebecca opened a thick envelope sealed in embossed blue. She froze. "United Nations. They're inviting us to speak in New York." Daniel stepped over, scanning the letter. His heart trembled. Years ago, he'd been thrown out of a conference hall like a disgraced man. Now, he and the woman beside him were being invited to the world stage to speak about the future of safe education. That day, the main hall of the United Nations was packed with delegates from dozens of nations. Spotlights blazed. Cameras broadcast the moment across the globe. Rebecca Collins stepped onto the podium. In an elegant white dress, she shone, not just as a CEO, but as a global leader. Her voice rang clear and full of conviction. Education cannot exist if the buildings themselves are unsafe. A child cannot learn math or literature if the ceiling above them might collapse. Technology is not just about screens and software. It must walk hand in hand with sturdy walls, safe bridges, and classrooms parents can trust. The room fell utterly silent. Every word landed like truth carved in stone. Rebecca paused, turned toward Daniel standing beside her, and smiled. "We don't speak from theory. We speak from the consequences we've lived through. And through integrity, we found a new path." Daniel stepped forward, took her hand, and looked out across the hall. His eyes glimmered. His voice was deep, steady. "I'm living proof of that." Thunderous applause erupted. Delegates rose to their feet. In that moment, Daniel knew the shadow of his past had finally closed. That evening, back home in Miami, their son Lucas, now nearly 5, came bursting out of his little study room, paper in hand, covered in colorful numbers and drawings. "Dad! Mom! Look! Teacher said I'm the best in math class today." Rebecca scooped him up, laughing through her smile. Daniel knelt to his son's eye level. "That's amazing, Lucas. And what do you want to be when you grow up?" Lucas tilted his head, thought for a moment, then answered, sweetly but firmly, "I want to be an engineer like you, Dad, and build things that help Mom's schools." Daniel's throat tightened. He pulled his son into his arms, and in that moment, he understood. Every loss, every scar, every ghost of the past had led him here, to his son's dream, to a legacy worth carrying forward. Late that night, after Lucas had fallen asleep, Daniel and Rebecca sat on their balcony, glasses of wine catching the moonlight. Waves lapped below. The wind whispered through the palms like a soft lullaby. Rebecca leaned on his shoulder, whispering, "Do you ever think, if I hadn't said that one line to you back then, would we be here now?" Daniel smiled, remembering that cold hallway in Chicago, when the young CEO looked him straight in the eye and said, "I need a date for the party. Come with me?" He answered softly, "If I'd said no that night, you'd probably still succeed. But you wouldn't have me, and I'd still be a ghost in some hallway." Rebecca squeezed his hand. "But you said yes." Daniel turned, kissed her forehead. "And that one, yes, changed everything. At its core, it all began with a simple phrase: "I need a date for the party." And Daniel Alvarez, without knowing it, had said yes not to a dinner, but to an entire life. And that was the unbelievable journey of Daniel Alvarez and Rebecca Collins, from an invisible janitor to global icons of education and integrity. If this story touched your heart, leave a comment below. What lesson did you take from Daniel and Rebecca's journey? Hit like to support the channel, subscribe to True Tale Time so you won't miss the next incredible story, and share this video with someone who might need a spark of inspiration. Because sometimes, just one nod, just one word, yes, can change an entire life. See you in the next episode of True Tale Time.